Hello everyone, what is up? It is me, Ewan from What Culture Comics on a happy new year in 2020, and I'm joined as ever by Zoe Miss Kelly.
2020.
Because we're here to talk to you today about a brand new DC rumor that looks to be probably the biggest comic book story of the year so far. What a statement that is, even though we're only in the first week. And yeah, basically for a while we've known that DC has some really interesting things cooked up for this year in regards to their actual timeline. We ran a few stories last year about stuff that was going on with Doomsday Clock and then different timelines, and then also some rumors about DC planning to replace Bruce Wayne as Batman as well, which was really interesting.
I mean, now it seems like it makes much more sense, but in possibly a way that means it won't happen.
Yes, it basically over the last day we've had a report from Bleeding Cool, and this is backed up by other reports from The Beat as well, talking about DC's plans for something called 5G, or 5th generation, just so you're not confused with the really super fast fiber optic broadband 4G. I've already forgotten, it's not broadband, it's something else to do with the phones. But anyway, basically what we've got now is a brand new reboot, apparently in the works for later this year. There's no official release date yet, but apparently we're going to see loads of DC's, most established characters get aged up out of nowhere and then be replaced with new characters. And apparently this is going to take place in a really weird way because we've got all these different replacements lined up. I'm just basically going to read an extract from the report. The 5th generation would have new individuals take the traditional roles held in the big superhero books, and we started to get specifics. That Jonathan Kent would become Superman, who's obviously the current Superboy. Luke Fox would become Batman, obviously he was Batwing for a long time. Captain Cold Jr. would be the new Flash. Joe Mullane would be the new lead Green Lantern, and the other characters would be aged out. So basically as well, at some point in 2020, the DC Comics timeline is going to get a new lick of paint in a really interesting way that kind of addresses some of our concerns, or at least my concerns, regarding the sliding timeline and how that sometimes prohibits, genuine growth. What do you think of this so far, Zoe?
I'm so mixed on it. On one hand, yeah, we can't. I think if through our entire lifetime we had the same people as the same superheroes, by the time I'm like 80, if I get that far, I'd be like, I'm sick of this. This man has been Batman longer than I've been alive. Somebody else needs to get a chance. But then I'm also very worried because obviously the problem with a non-static timeline is that people could very easily hate it. I could very easily hate it. It does almost definitely mean that Alfred is still dead.
Yes.
Which hurt me.
This is the frustrating thing about it for me, is that, we had Doomsday Clock, which, was a big song and dance about finally addressing all those kind of concerns readers had regarding the New 52 and erasing the, I'm not going to say unquantifiable uniqueness of the DC universe, because it is easy to ascertain what makes DC so great, but in terms of how the magic was lost with the New 52 and how DC Rebirth worked to kind of rekindle a lot of the love that was lost for that universe after all the attempts to modernize it came around. We had Dr. Manhattan effectively as a proxy stand-in for DC editorial, and then he comes to that realization at the end of Doomsday Clock that the metaverse revolves around Superman, and there are certain things that should always be present, like the Justice Society and, Superman's parents and whatnot. But it already looks as though Doomsday Clock is getting a little bit of not completely just wiped away, but in terms of looking at what it had in the future, it did mention 5G briefly, which again can go to show that DC have a contingency plan to say, oh, we did actually plan this all along. But on the surface, it's it's another reboot. We've had 5 of them, and I'm just kind of a little bit tired of them all at this point. I don't know about you.
I genuinely thought that 5G stood for its 5th reboot. I was like, where are we at? I think the only thing is, if it turns out this is part of some huge plan, then that'll be very good. But if it turns out that this is just another time that DC have sort of had a meeting and they're like, oh, we should probably sort the time in our universe, and they've decided to change stuff again, I think a lot of other people are going to be furious because it's can we just do the comic?
Yes.
Can we just have comics for a minute instead of being historically, let's look at the comic timeline?
Yes, and the thing is, I'm always game for more legacy characters, and DC has so many legacy characters that have already gone in and stepped into certain big roles. We had Dick Grayson as Batman for a long time. We had Commissioner Gordon step in randomly for a brief while, and we've also had Batman Beyond, where Terry McGinnis was Batman for a long time. We've had a Damian Wayne future Batman series. These things aren't necessarily alien, it's just the idea that Bruce Wayne is always going to be Batman in some different kind of continuity. And the most fascinating thing for me about this, because I definitely think it is a huge risk, isn't that in this report, Bleeding Cool actually mentioned that it's going to acknowledge everything that's come before. So everything, just in case you're worried that literally everything that you've just read isn't going to matter, apparently it is going to take into account all the growth that has occurred over the many decades. It's just that we're going to get to a point in time where Bruce Wayne is 60 years old and Superman is 60 years old, and they're phasing out their roles as these characters. And it's really confusing to me because I have so many questions regarding this, sort of like, well, if Bruce Wayne is 60 years old, what point did his stories take place in the past? Are we going to get like a Hellboy static timeline where we actually have, in 1945 Batman, well, actually no, if he's 16 in 2020, that would mean that he was 20 in 1960, and so he would have been around the Silver Age, and then the Bronze Age he would have been in his 30s.
Look at this
So
maths.
this is just all actually just getting in my head. So someone already mentioned in one of the comment sections of Bleeding Cool that it took place, if Bruce Wayne is 60 and it was 35 years after, it would be 35 years after Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Yeah.
I'm really confused right now, but basically the idea that they're going to have to work out, if they want to, they could just make it a sliding static timeline, which would be the most confusing thing ever, where they are all just 60 now, but then everything is currently always the modern times, which would really be confusing. I don't know. What would you prefer to see out of that? Do you want a tangible kind of set timeline where, say, in the 1970s, Batman met Ra's al Ghul for the first time?
It's a mixed one because I like a lot of timeless stories, and I think obviously when and if Bruce Wayne stops being Batman, like for realsies, for good, it's gonna feel super weird if that's the way they go about it. But also, I am sick of it being like, everyone is in their 20s, because I'm in my 20s, and I don't want to hear more about other people in their 20s. Please, give me an old Batman. Don't make me think about my life.
Yeah, it's the thing with this as well is like, I definitely am down to see new versions of these characters come around. I think Luke Fox's Batman is a genius pick in regards to basically how, the DC Batman titles, he talked for a long time last year about, how it felt as though when Tom King was trying to introduce, more sizable changes to the DC mythos, him getting hooked off the book was effectively DC's way of being like, well, you can change some things, but just not in the big limelight. You can have the corner over there where we can forget about it for a while, which is a shame because I think that's both an endemic issue at Marvel and DC. And everyone who's reading superhero comics wants these stories to matter and they want to see characters progress. So the thing that's confusing to me is how just about they're going to map this out and whether it's going to feel too gimmicky when they actually do it, because I genuinely want to see these characters actually grow. If we're going to have Batman be 60 now, let's actually, go through and flash out those past stories. And one thing that I think is a great idea is if they do age him up to 60 now, you basically get reinterpretations of those classic stories, not necessarily that, but basically map it out so that in the 1980s we had a bunch of Legends of the Dark Knight stuff, and then this has all happened. You can basically go back and chart what Batman was up to in this new timeline, even though it's acknowledging everything that's come before, in the same way Hellboy does, where you have those new series come out where it's like Hellboy in the BPRD 1954, and you can map it out that way. I don't know.
There's a lot of complication with it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a bad thing. It just means there's a lot of room for mistakes. So as long as they stay sharp, as long as they don't put too much weird stuff later on, because he can only get beat up so many times when he's been a professional for like 30 years.
But yeah, basically we don't know when the exact release date is. In the report they mention as well that Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo are actually working on a sequel to Dark Knight's Metal, which is strange because I genuinely thought that Last Night on Earth was meant to be their last big Batman hurrah, but apparently they're working on something called Death Metal, and that's going to basically, if that's not going to wrap up on the whole Justice League aspect of things, it's going to tie into its own series, and yeah, all these different 5G elements are apparently going to come into play at some point. And it's, again, the main thing that sticks out to me about this is that it's risky. I think if you're going to have all your characters basically transition into legacy characters, that is a huge thing to do at once. Even when Marvel had Marvel, it was all new, all different Marvel, even though they had that, they still had characters that were still around for a long time, and you had that kind of the grounding influence of it, I guess. But with this, you're basically saying that everyone is now going to be phased out of these roles. That's going to be an interesting thing. I hope it brings in new readers. I hope it does well, of course. And I'm really excited to see something that is new and different, but it is definitely, I think it is a little bit of a gamble.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how much they've planned it, because obviously when we found out about the rumours, I was like, it's weird that Doomsday Clock doesn't end with the beginning of it, because that would make sort of a more cohesive sense. But they may have something planned. We can't tell the future. I have a lot of hope, but I generally have a lot of hope. So
you do. You are
shall
filled with
see.
hope all the time, which is a really risky thing to be when you love comics. But yeah, please let us know what you think of these new rumors down in the comments below. Are you excited for a new rebooted DC universe that doesn't have Bruce Wayne as Batman or even Clark Kent as Superman? It's also interesting because they're actually going to tie in the universe into the kind of the Wonder Woman making her the first hero in the DC mythos as well. So yeah, lots of different things coming out from this. I'm really curious to see what you guys think down in the comments below. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and head back on over to whatculture.com/comics. We'll have actual write-ups on this story as it emerges. You can follow me on Twitter at @EwanRunesThings. You can follow Zoe on Twitter at
Zemscale.
and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.